Bob Glaub, born in New York and raised in Los Angeles, got his first taste of the studio in 1972 when he recorded on Jesse Ed Davis's album, Keep Me Coming. Bob's affiliation with Jesse Ed led to his first major recording sessions, featuring none other than John Lennon and Rod Stewart. He played on John's rock and roll album and Rod's Atlantic Crossing. With this, Bob's studio career was off and running. He was practically considered Asylum Records' house bassist, recording his signature sound on albums by Jackson Browne, Warren Zevon, and Linda Ronstadt, among others, through the mid to late 1970s. Around 1978, Bob joined Jackson Browne's band and toured the world with him until he stepped down in 1989. Bob was also Linda Ronstadt's touring bass player from 1980 to 2000. His solid, distinctive sound and style has kept him busy throughout the last 30-plus years with a string of major label releases that include The Pretender, Lawyers in Love, and Hold Out by Jackson Browne, A Night on the Town and Atlantic Crossing by Rod Stewart, Excitable Boy by Warren Zevon, Last Dance and Bad Girls by Donna Summer, Book of Dreams by the Steve Miller Band, American Prayer by The Doors, Blue Moon Swamp and Premonition by John Fogerty, Mad Love and Get Closer by Linda Ronstadt, Daylight Again by Crosby, Stills and Nash, Belladonna and Modern by Stevie Nicks, The Missing Years by John Prine, American Dream by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, as well as albums by Springsteen, Dylan, Seeger, The Bee Gees, Neil Diamond, Dusty Springfield, Rodney Crowell, Aaron Neville, Ringo Starr, Taj Mahal, Jerry Lee Lewis, and countless others. In 1997, Bob joined John Fogerty's band for a tour that included the DVD release Premonition, a live concert documenting Fogerty's successful reemergence into rock music. Between 2000 and 2002, Bob recorded and toured the U.S. with Dwight Yoakam. Bob has been busy the last several years making records in Los Angeles and other studios around the USA. Bob and Lakland got together in 1999 to create the Bob Glaub signature model. Born and raised right here in Chicago, Darryl Jones emerged in 1983 with a gig as bassist with the immortal jazz trumpeter Miles Davis. But Darryl Jones, just 22 years old at the time, was just warming up. In 1985, with Miles's blessing, Darryl took a job with rock and pop superstar Sting. The Dream of the Blue Turtles CD and full-length video Bring On the Night were products of this association. Next, Darryl moved on to New York's elite contemporary jazz scene, performing and recording with guitarists John Scofield and Mike Stern, Gil Evans' big band, and Steps Ahead. The demand for Darryl's rock-solid feel kept him busy as a sideman, on tours with Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, Peter Gabriel, and Madonna, while he was also recording with everyone from Eric Clapton to Spike Lee. In 1993, when the Rolling Stones announced the departure of charter member Bill Wyman, Darryl saw a potential opportunity. A gig with the Stones was in no way a slam dunk, since over 20 of the world's top bass players had the same idea, but Darryl gave it a try. His audition went well, very well in fact, and Darryl ultimately got the coveted slot. Darryl was off to record the Voodoo Lounge album and do the subsequent world tour. 3 world tours later, and Darryl and the Stones are still going strong. Darryl's Lakland signature bass came out in 2002. Donald Duck Dunn hails from the birthplace of rock and roll, Memphis, Tennessee. A call from guitarist Steve Cropper in 1962 led to Duck joining Booker T and the MGs. They soon became the house band for the Stax Recording Company in Memphis. Duck's credits for Stax include classic sessions by such artists as Wilson Pickett, Carla Thomas, Isaac Hayes, Eddie Floyd, Sam and Dave, Albert King, and Otis Redding. Duck toured the globe with Stax Reviews and was on stage with Otis Redding at the Monterey Pop Festival. Many hits and a few world tours later, Duck called it quits and moved from Memphis to L.A. to begin a studio career out there. While in L.A., Duck put his signature sound and feel on recordings by Rod Stewart, Tom Petty, Bill Withers, Peter Frampton, Robert Palmer, and Joan Baez, among many others. In the late 70s, Duck received the most visible role of his career. Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi chose Duck to be a part of their multimedia project, The Blues Brothers. The film and subsequent albums were smash successes. In the mid-'80s, Duck was hired by Eric Clapton to be in his band. His tenure with Clapton included a performance at Bob Geldof's Live Aid. In 1993, Duck first played with his current employer, Neil Young. At this point, Duck's still not done with Neil, as he still tours and records with him and Crazy Horse. Duck, introduced to us by Bob Glaub, has played Lakland basses since 2000. 2005 marks the launch of his signature model. Jerry Scheff was raised in Northern California and entered the Los Angeles music scene in 1964. Jerry stayed busy recording both upright and electric bass with artists like The Association, the Everly Brothers, Johnny Mathis, and Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies. In 1969, at the urging of guitarist James Burton, Jerry auditioned for Elvis Presley's live concert comeback. He got the job with Elvis's Taking Care of Business band, TCB, and stayed on until 1973. After 2 years, he returned to play with the King again until Elvis's death in 1977. During his tenure with Elvis, Jerry kept active with his studio career, and in 1971, he recorded with The Doors on Jim Morrison's final album, L.A. Woman. Jerry took part in a number of tours, including one with Bob Dylan. Ironically, he eventually wound up with yet another Elvis, Elvis Costello. Jerry was with the bespectacled UK Elvis until the late 80s. In 1989, Jerry was part of the Roy Orbison project Black and White, which featured a veritable who's who of rock musicians. In the 90s, Jerry was a favorite of celebrated producers Mitchell Froom and T-Bone Burnett. Jerry recorded on a series of acclaimed albums by Richard Thompson, as well as Sam Phillips, Jimmie Dale Gilmore, and Bruce Cockburn, to name a few. In the late 90s, Jerry got back together with the TCB band and toured the world with the Elvis the Concert multimedia event, which featured the filmed Elvis in his glory days singing with a live band. Jerry started playing Lakland in 1998. His signature model was released in 2000. Joe Osborne hails from Shreveport, Louisiana. In 1960, at the urging of high school friend James Burton, Joe, then a guitarist, relocated to Los Angeles to join Rick Nelson's band on bass. Joe's guitar sensibilities led him to create a cutting yet warm bass sound that could even be heard through small transistor radio speakers. Joe started turning heads immediately with this sound, and he soon began moodlining with other artists and producers around LA. Besides studio work, Joe took live gigs like his 1963 year-long residency with Johnny Rivers at the famed Whiskey A Go-Go on Sunset Strip. Joe also played at the Monterey Pop Festival with the Mamas and the Papas. By the late 60s, Joe was on fire, recording with some of the industry's most popular artists, including the Mamas and the Papas, Simon and Garfunkel, Neil Diamond, the Carpenters, the Monkees, and the Fifth Dimension, just to name a few. Joe was averaging 2 top 10 records per week. During this period, Joe recorded on more hit records than any single bass player in history. LA took its toll on Joe and his family, so in 1974 they relocated to Nashville. In 1977, Joe had the opportunity to record with Neil Young on the Comes a Time album. Joe recorded more hit singles on the country side than on the pop side, but his success was bittersweet. In the 70s and early 80s, some Nashville producers didn't understand that Joe's sound was derived by playing flat-wound strings with a pick. Their requests for Joe to change his style to fingers and round-wound strings were too much for Joe, and he relocated again back home to Shreveport in 1989. Joe got together with Lakland in 1998 when a Bass Player magazine article helped Dan realize who played bass on all those great records. In 1999, the Joe Osborne signature bass was launched, and it has since become a staple in the Lakland line.